All right, settle down, you little heathens. I am Lantern Keeper Silas Freed. I am an LK5, and you will listen to me. We are speaking today in your second lecture about the deviations, refinement, and the types of agents and dark beings that compose our cosmos. Earlier we spoke of the murk, and that it is the substance from which all phenomena normally arise. Beings are composed of murk, all save one. Now most of you grew up in religious systems that compare God to light. Light, halo, shining saints. These are all part of the iconography and hagiography of religious systems upon our rock. This phenomenon is a memory in every human soul that there is something within us that is not limited by the conditions that we find ourselves in. There is something limitless inside our limited flesh and minds. This paradox was begat by a being unlike anything that we could ever fully fathom. We call it the brilliance, to show that it is the source of all that we could ever know. And just as light is the basis of our sight and the origin of our common term that we understand a subject, I see, so the brilliance is ultimately the source of what we understand about our world. It would not be an unfair comparison to say that the brilliance is the limitless creator god of Western myth. The brilliance does not seem to communicate or act directly upon the murk that vibrates at slower rates than it does, and yet it does at times send forth a note or a word that the receptive mind can hear. Deviations are the term that society uses to denote how far removed from the limitless uniformity of the murk's natural state a being is. The higher the number of the deviants, the less of the original vibration of the murk that being has within itself. I did not realize a great way to describe this at first until it occurred to me that if you think of the murk as being sea level, deviance is the altitude. Thus, the higher the number of the deviants, the less tied the being is to the original limitless potential of the murk, and the more limited and defined it is. Now, when we speak of definition, we speak of how, for lack of a better term, solid and inflexible the being is. The lowest levels of deviance, however, do not refer to the deviance that the being has from the murk itself, for the lowest levels of deviance we place upon some very unique beings that surround the brilliance in its realm of the untold. We'll speak briefly of these, and in great detail in the latter lecture. These three beings are referred to as the court of the brilliance, the intercessors of the untold, and the guardians of the crystalline wall. The court has a deviance of 1/2. The intercessors have a deviance of 1/4, and the guardians of the crystalline wall have a deviance of 1/8. This represents that these beings were generated before the murk was a simple uniformity as it has become. It's not quite clear how in the succession of events, if they did succeed in linear fashion, the murk and the brilliance came to be. But the brilliance is definitely not composed of the murk. And the three types of beings that serve the brilliance, though when we encounter them seem to be encased in murk, much like us, have a different energy within them that animates them than that of the murk. If some of you are thinking of angels, you are not far from the mark. These fractional rates represent that these beings are nowhere near as limited as beings that have a positive deviance, yet are more limited than the brilliance from which they are derived. The beings that have a positive deviance listed by their name or their classification are separated from the murk's original state. The maw has a deviance of 1. The greater dark beings have a deviance of 2. The great dark beings have a deviance of 3. The dark beings have a deviance of 4. The greatest agents have a deviance of 5. The greater agents have a deviance of 8. The agents have a deviance of 7. Miter agents have a deviance of 8. The totems have a deviance of 9. The devils and demons have a deviance of 10. The spirits, ancestors, place spirits all have a deviance of 11. Humans have a deviance of 12. And animals have a deviance of 13. Now, lest you think that this is some kind of occult sports card statistic, it is in fact an important bit of survival information for you. Essentially, a being cannot best a being in mental combat that is more than 3 deviants lower than it. Thus, even we lantern keepers are powerless against minor agents. By ritual and devices, one can expand one's potency somewhat. The least skilled of us by a degree, the most skilled of us ever by 3 or more degrees, and most of us by 2 degrees. Thus, with the proper spells and talismans, you can expect to be able to constrain a being of a deviance equivalent to roughly a greater agent. You cannot hope to stop a dark being. That simply does not happen. Some exceptional lantern keepers have, at the proper places and times, been able to do so, but there are perhaps only a dozen or so known events in all of our history. Together, a society can boost the power of a rite and reduce the level of deviance that we can effect, but this is exponentially costly. The revoking of Askasar's last attempt to come through into our world in the 1920s required the harnessing of all the deaths of the victims of the Spanish influenza epidemic and using their souls to power the eldritch bitch slap that we gave him. That is 100 million people, brothers and sisters, whose deaths bought us breathing space. This is a rule of power that cannot be ignored. Do not attempt to do so. The farther one is from a rock, however, the less resistance one faces in exerting one's will upon the murk. In such environs, you can consider yourselves to be able to manipulate lower levels of deviance. Amongst the shoals and the broken rocks, you are able to reap any additional potency. Unable to reap any additional potency. But once upon the wild seas, you can expect to effect 1 additional decrease of deviance of a being. And once past Akasabu, you can expect to exert your will over 2 less levels of deviance. It is our belief that an entire order, such as our own, performed a great heroic deed in the distant past. They traveled upon a black road to Akasabu, and by performing a rite in which they died there, they largely sealed it off from being able to reach our own rock. We cannot express the great debt all of humanity owes them for this feat. The process of being able to manipulate murk we refer to as refinement. The practices of this process have been given to all of humanity. We have coded it in the world's various religions, philosophies, literatures, and movies. Vulgar people refer to it as magic, but it is not the same thing. Frater Arrhidaeus' effort is perhaps the best well known, as he sought to reveal some truth to the masses via the medium of the work of a certain director. Sadly, Mr. Lucas was not able to accept the concepts and miscast our attempt as that of the Jedi and the murk as the Force. We have not tried to use popular media since, and I quote, the failed revival of 77. You can stop snickering, please. The next most notable attempt was to repair a patch we issued into the wall of our rock. The second semi-public attempt you may be aware of was this harmonic convergence of 87. When many people began meditating around the world, we could use that energy to help close several cracks that had led to dangerous places, and were then able to relocate our watchmen to other fissures. Now, most humans cannot manipulate anything other than their own earth, which means that they might make personal life and physical changes, but due to cultural reasons and the limits of their vision, they are unwilling to manipulate the murk that composes their own life. Mystical and gifted humans can manipulate their water, and we see this often in a politician or religious leader. A precious few can break the mold into new ideas and manipulate their fire, and fewer still are those that can manipulate their air, their most resistant thoughts and attitudes, and see the world as clearly as we. Many become occultists, or French scientists, who forever hover on the door of true knowing. And this is why you were chosen to become a member of our society. You are willing to manipulate all the bars of your life song. from the deep to the night. This allows you to fully use your power of will to manipulate the murk. But you must keep a sense of presence about your place in the scheme of the cosmos, or hubris will murder you, or those you love. The process of this refinement is partly mental, by the adoption of lifestyle choices and mental attitudes. It is partly physical, by the ingestion of various alchemical elixirs and complementary physical exercises, and it is partly spiritual, in increasing expertise in manipulating the murk around us and inside of us. Such intensive work cannot be the practice of a culture, no matter how much we may wish it to be. Someone has to grow the food, build the houses, create new inventions, and manage the workload. Now let us speak of the kinds of beings and agents one is likely to meet as a lantern keeper. We shall explore this from those beings that possess the greatest degree of deviance to a lesser amount. Monsters are essentially humans. They are mortal and can be slain. They may suffer from high degrees of corruption, manifested as weird abilities in physical form, but they are essentially as limited as a human being. They simply possess a different set of limits. Our rock has quite a few monsters, but it pales in comparison to some of the rocks in the murk for the quantity of dangerous animal and monster life upon them. Monsters, like humans, are considered to have a deviance of between 12 and 13 degrees. The spirits is a collective term we use to speak about disincarnate beings that occupy a vibration close to our own level of deviance. The deviance level is listed as 11. These spirits include the disembodied wills of the dead, which are mostly merely shadows of a personality, cognizant ancestors that have exercised their will to remain active in a descendant's life, Jackson, I did say turn off cell phones before the lecture, did I not? Where was I? Oh. And spirits also include naturally occurring intelligence, such as the genius loci phenomenon, that occupy an area of the murk that seems confined to a corresponding place or an object of a lower vibration. The personal guiding spirit of a human being, called the guardian angel or the daimon in the classical Greek, is also an example of the spirit of this deviance. The agents, variously called devils, demons, etc., are creatures of the next degree of deviance. Creatures of this deviance are able to greatly alter the murk for those with deviance below their own. Greater than their own. They are difficult to constrain, but it is possible by hardening the murk around them and essentially increasing their level of deviance from the murk's original state. This is often seen in binding circles, which increase their limits, and exorcisms which seek to dissipate their forms and render them so far removed from their original state that they become as matter. Many of these spirits have specific rights to banish and bind them, as well as to call them, and unscrupulous users of sorcery often broker deals with these beings who are lower than them in deviance, so that the sorcerer can achieve some greater ability to manipulate the murk. But they are not so far removed from the sorcerer that they are incomprehensible, or so alien that they cannot be understood. And this is primarily why in legend you see them being the being that is sought after for arcane guidance. Now, in case you have not already read enough fiction to know how wrong such enterprises go, and how twisted the actual accounts are of what can happen to the mind and body, not to mention the good of the world around an area where such operations of diablerie take place, I shall state for the record that should you attempt to summon and bind a demon or devil to your will, that it is a damn fucking stupid idea and can get you executed by the Society for the Good of Mankind. There are a few exceptions. One is using a demon's right to trap it, and another is to use a demon's name to summon it for being slain. Needless to say, those are not the typical uses of this power in myth, as most people are intent upon selfish gain. The Lantern Society does not brook such base impulses as greed and envy amongst its members. They have proven to be disastrous for the past of the human race. Where was I? Oh yes. The totems. The totems have a lower rate of deviance and are to animals and places and elemental forces what a god or a goddess is to a human being. The totems are a shared form of thought that all the members of the totem contribute to subconsciously. Thus, all dogs that exist contribute to the totem of dog. All mountains of the earth and of the rocks strewn throughout the murk contribute to the totem of the mountain, and all the atmospheric contributions across the vast spiraling dark ocean contribute to the totem of the wind. Totems are neutral in disposition towards the human mind, and this is why so many ancient cultures encourage shamans that work with them. Unlike Azazel, the wicked dog, the totem of the cat is never going to eat your soul. Totems can, with the proper attunement and appeasement, be very useful to a lantern keeper that find themselves traveling in the murk, particularly in the areas of the dark ocean. There is one totem in particular that we refer to as the hitchhiker, which is the totem of all paths, roads, and even the black roads in particular, that we have traveled or have ever been traveled. The hitchhiker is also unique in that he is a created totem. That is, he is a totem created by ancient sages long ago to aid them in finding their way through the murk and across the dark ocean. Now shall we speak of the minor agents. These agents are beings that formerly you have heard referred to as demigods, manes, cherubim, fiends, etc. These spirits possess the ability to wound you greatly, and often have a vast wealth of knowledge from which to draw. Unlike lower-level agents, they are extremely cunning and dangerous. When they appear upon the rock, they have often leave behind large organizations that do their bidding, be these cults, corporations on our own time, or full-fledged functioning religions. Many of the sages of old have left such a strong presence in the murk that they now manifest as these beings. Such a sage, commonly referred to as the avatar of the young old boy, was once the human that was referred to as Lao Tzu in China. These beings we class between 5 to 7 degrees of deviance, are called in myth archangels, seraphim, and minor gods. These beings have their own wills but are subject to the master of that of the will above them. They rarely walk the rocks, being instead occupied with work upon the dark ocean. However, there are certain of these more powerful agents that we do encounter from time to time, and most often encountered upon the rock are the agents we refer to as the Sen Peddler, the Serpentine Prophetess, and the Wandering Healer. The Sen Peddler is the basis for those tales of the Faustian bargain. It appears, it prods, and it tempts. It gets a contract of some kind from a human mind. The Sen Peddler's purpose is to help open cracks in the wall by getting humans to force those cracks open, or to cease to give the wall positive pressure. The peddler is not to be trifled with. No lantern keeper, no knight, has ever prevailed in killing it. The best we have ever done is drive it off for a while. The peddler always appears as a male. Its true name is unknown to us, but we have encountered a name for it of old. Huathasor. I repeat that. Huathasor. And our banishment spell against it uses this name. The Sen Peddler is a shape changer, of its own shape and of the murk around it. It can even alter the immediate surroundings of the rock it is upon by altering the unique murk around it. Yes, it is that powerful. In opposition to it, we have encountered a being that we refer to as the Serpentine Prophetess. This agent works for the being that we know as Aghanasha. The agent appears as a female human of great beauty and wiles, and may have even once been a human being herself. She appears wherever the Sen Peddler goes, almost as if she is chasing him, or in locales ahead of him that she fears he will visit, to prepare them to resist him. The Serpentine Prophetess often offers aid against the peddler, but for a price, and this price is often the service of a human being she is attempting to woo away from darkness to the cause of Aghanasha. But before you think that benign, know that the Serpentine Prophetess often enters into relationships with other women and convinces them to leave our rock for the estuary controlled by Aghanasha. What happens to these women is unknown, but it is posited that Aghanasha needs human women for some purpose of its own. We have a name for this prophetess, but we have no effective summation or binding right. Its name is Yishra. I shall repeat that. Yishra. Like the peddler, Yishra can change her shape, though not that of the rock around her, and seems able to open black roads at will. Now I realize that I prepared you with doom and gloom, but not every being you will meet out in the dark ocean is malign or indifferent. The Wandering Healer is a being of great intent that has helped many magicians return to the rock, hale and whole. The being appears as a man or woman glowing with light. Since roughly the 3rd century before Christ, the being has appeared with wings. It is the basis for most of the world's religions' tales about angels. At times it appears to heal, at others to warn. Many times it appears to a magician on a walkabout and imparts some truth to them or revelation. Jackson? Oh yes, you better have turned that phone off. So as I was saying, since the 3rd century, the being has shown up with light and has been very helpful. It appears as a man or woman glowing with light, and it is the basis essentially for the healing guardian angel that you often hear of. The many times it has appeared to magicians on walkabout, it has come when we have been gravely wounded and would not have survived without it. Now here is where this being differs from the other agents. Whereas all that exists is composed of murk, the Wandering Healer apparently comes from beyond the crystalline wall, for it is composed of holy fire, much as the reserve of holy fire we maintain is. The form around it is the thinnest veneer of murk that keeps within it the glowing sacred flame. It is our belief that it is a necessity for it to manifest at our lower levels of vibration. Needless to say, you should treat the Wandering Healer with great respect. Dark beings roam the dark ocean and can at times come as near as the wall of our rock. Our wall keeps them from crossing into our bar. The dark beings are as powerful as any pantheon of gods of legend. A single one of them is as powerful as an entire pantheon of the gods of legend. Their minds are alien and only vaguely understandable to us. They are the hammer of the great dark beings' armies. We are unable to control them, but they can be banished with enough directed power. Great dark beings are more powerful forms of a dark being. They are unable to be banished. Fortunately, their own murk's resonance prevents them from approaching us closer than the broken rocks. Yet should the proper black road be opened, they could, in theory, set foot upon our own rock, and we must prevent this at all costs. Greater dark beings rule the others. They control entire realms of the dark ocean. We should now mention the Lord of Akasabu. Akasar, the Lord of the Basalt Throne, rules the entire bar of Akasabu. No power we possess can harm it. Beings of this magnitude can only be affected by such immense forces of the cosmos that we can only barely fathom them. The spider thing of Akasabu has only one motivation that we can understand. It needs to eat, and it eats entire populations of souls. It can slow down its thoughts that we can hear them, and at times you will see this in the insane, for to hear its voice is to be warped forever. The Maw is the last being that we shall speak of. This manifestation of death and entropy is the devourer of worlds. It defies all understanding other than it is the end of all meaning. We know of it only because of those that below it that fear it, including the Lord of Akasabu. We have an entire lecture about what lays beyond the Maw, the great untold, the ultimate will, the brilliance. But to be honest, it's all conjecture. Hopeful conjecture, and it will keep you going whenever you're facing down dark things in the ocean. But conjecture. And before we stray into that realm of conjecture, I would like for you to get grounded in our facts and our lore. Now, the purpose of this little talk has been to simplify the classification of spirits you may meet in the murk when you go on walkabout. Magicians of the past have made vast catalogs of spirits and their supposed properties, And this approach is very limited in its effectiveness due to the infinite variety and quantity of the beings that live in the dark ocean. The Society does not keep a catalog of all the spirits that have been written, but we do keep a catalog of all the spirits we have encountered that we can test and that we can prove. We have recorded all on how they appear to behave, all how they appear to be limited, and all how they appear to be motivated. You have open access to that library, as you will probably need it to keep from having your face bitten off by a monster. When next we meet, we shall discuss why it is our society uses the only tool against these beings we have found completely effective, that of the refinement of magic and the way it functions, and ways to better master it.